Ladies and gentlemen, that's what federalism is. And if you're looking for someone who's learned lessons, I heard Carly say the other day at the debate that people swimming in the fish tank don't even know how polluted the fish tank is. She's right. A lot of them don't. But here's the problem. Whoever we elect as president is going to have to swim in that fish tank. And guess what? If you aren't used to swimming in that water, you're going to have a hard time surviving in that water. If you don't know where the sharks are, if you don't know where the danger is, we're going to end up electing someone who's going to go to Washington, D.C., who has no idea how to swim and survive in those waters and thrive and clean up that tank. Because it isn't like any other job you've ever had. It's not like being a governor or a CEO. It's not. It's a very different world. And you better have someone who understands, because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. Let's say I asked this gentleman, I didn't ask him, that I'm Theo Epstein and I hire him as the new manager of the Boston Red Sox. And you can say, well, great. Is Theo still the general manager? Or did they fire him? They fired him? Good. Well, maybe they shouldn't have, given this year. But let's say we appoint him the manager of the Boston Red Sox. And let's say he knows a little bit about baseball. I mean, he follows baseball. He's a Sox fan, okay. But he's going to go into the clubhouse tomorrow, and what's he going to do? How's he going to manage a team? He's never managed baseball before. He's never been involved in a major league environment. What's he going to do? He's going to have to hire people around him to help him coach the team. That's what everybody in Washington is going to do. If you don't know, if you don't have experience, if you don't know what you're doing, then you're going to have to hire a bunch of people. Look, if they put me as the head of General Motors, I'd take the job. But I'm going to have to hire a lot of people who know about cars because I don't know that much about running a car. If I'm going to run a coal company, I'm going to have to hire really smart people who tell me about, now I know a lot about coal, but I can't run a coal business until I get a lot of smart people around me. But guess who those smart people are in Washington? They're called the establishment. And so you're going to have a whole bunch of people who know Washington. And how do they know Washington? Because, well, they're part of the establishment. And so when the State Department comes to you and you say, well, I want to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Oh, no, you can't do that. No. Don't you realize what will happen? And you have all these really important people at the State Department come to you and tell you how you're going to start World War III if you do it. And so what's going to happen? Well, you're going to go to your experts and they're going to say, oh, yeah, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. The White House is not a place for on-the-job training. You want someone who's going to move federalism? Then maybe hire someone who's done federalism. You want someone who's going to understand the responsibilities of taking on the greatest threat that this country's ever faced, and I believe that right now, then you better hire someone who knows that threat and has been able to take it on and be successful. That's your challenge. You folks have a big responsibility here in New Hampshire. You get to be the human resource department for the country and interview these candidates and make a decision who's ready to be president, who has the ideas, the experience, and the skills necessary to win and to govern. And here's what I know you folks will do, because you've done it before. You won't listen to the polls. Because I guarantee you, I just wish one pollster would ask this question. When they ask one of these national polls, before they list all the candidates, ask them this. Name all the Republican candidates for president. Just ask that question. Name all the Republican candidates for president. If more than 50% can name 4, I'd be shocked. Yet, that is who the media talks about. You know better. You know better. Don't listen to polling people who aren't paying attention like you are. Pay attention. And you do your job. Because you know what, ladies and gentlemen? This country needs it. This country needs people who are paying attention, who are going to put forth the people who are the right person to govern this country. And that's why I'm here today. I've run before. Every nasty thing that's ever been said or done, you all know. The media's put me out there. They've laid me out there. And you know what? I went on and won 11 states last time around. I ran out of time more than anything else. And so I would just ask you to take a good look and measure what's necessary and who has the vision and the record and who can you trust. I'll close with this. The other day I was with Chuck Grassley in Iowa, and he was introducing me at this event, and he sort of got up and sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit about what to say, and he said, well, let me just say this. I've known Rick Santorum for 20 years, and he hasn't changed a bit. Now, how many folks have you sent to Washington thinking you knew who they were, and you found out they weren't exactly who you thought they were? Ladies and gentlemen, I may not be the flashiest car in the showroom, but you know who I am, and you know what I'll do, and you can trust me. That's a pretty good start. Thank you, and God bless.
So we have time for some questions. And if you do have questions, you can get them up to me. First question, why do politicians use entitlements for federal handouts when Social Security and Medicare are the only entitlements? Why do they use that term?
Well, there's more than Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are three federal entitlements. Are you saying they shouldn't use that term for those? Or I'm a little confused. I mean, food stamps these other programs are entitlements. An entitlement is something, if you qualify under the law, if you meet the qualifications in the law, you are entitled to the money. That's what an entitlement is. It's simple as that. So if you meet the qualification for Social Security under the law, you therefore are entitled to money. It's not subject to appropriation. So entitlements are not subject to appropriations. We spend however much money the law requires us to spend based on who's entitled. Medicare is an example. Medicare is an entitlement. It doesn't matter. It's still an entitlement. How it's funded has nothing to do with whether it's an entitlement or not. Entitlement means that there's no limit on the funding for that program. So there's not a limit to Medicare. Medicare is an entitlement. If you qualify, you get it. How much you spend doesn't matter because there's no limit. So that's what makes an entitlement and I know people get upset, oh, you can't call Social Security an entitlement. It is an entitlement. It's funded by payroll taxes, but it doesn't mean it's not an entitlement, okay? And I understand you have to differentiate from Social Security, which is an entitlement which is earned over time, and Medicare, which is earned over time, and food stamps, which isn't, or supplemental security income, SSI, which isn't. But they're both entitlements. One is just paid for by the person who receives the entitlement. The other is not.
Thanks, Senator. President Obama announced this week that he would not authorize the current defense spending bill. Your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
So President Obama announced this week that he most likely would not authorize the current defense spending bill. Okay. Your thoughts on that?
We have not had a defense appropriation bill in 7 years. Just so you understand what that means. On the practical effect of the government, of the federal government, the Defense Department having to go year to year with a continuing resolution. So no increase in funding, generally speaking, and in fact, under the sequester, a decrease in funding. But what people don't understand is that if you don't have new contract authority under a new appropriation bill, if you have a continuing resolution, that means you have to continue with last year's contracts, last year's authority. What's that mean? That we've been running for 7 years on contracts that are 7 years old. Wait a minute. If you have someone new coming in and wants to bring a new product or bring a new technology, they just can't hire you. Or they may be able to hire you on a little small temporary basis. But if you want to get into the federal contract and get funds, you actually have to go to a contractor who got a contract 7 years ago. You have to pay that contractor some money to manage your contract, and then you get to put into the chain. It is crazy what we're doing. We are breeding inefficiency. And by the way, if you happen to be a contractor that got a contract 7 years ago, you're making a ton of money, and you're doing nothing. Because you just happen to hit the lottery that's the last time we allowed new contracting authority. It is a absolute disaster. It's wasteful beyond, the government is pretty wasteful to begin with. We've now added a layer of waste, and we have contracts that we don't even need anymore because they're 7 years old. But they still have those contracts. So it is an injustice to the Defense Department, and the President knows this. The President knows that he has breeded inefficiency exponentially in the Defense Department. They're stealing money from overseas contingency operations to fund basic Defense Department spending. In other words, you're taking money that was meant for our warfighters overseas, and they simply don't have the money to run their programs anymore because of this inefficiency. And for the President to say, I'm not going to sign it, if there's any question you had about whether this President wants to destroy the capability of this military, it's the fact that he's not demanded for a clean defense appropriation bill so we can start to at least spend the money we have efficiently. He simply doesn't care. And that's why he's saying what he's saying, in my opinion.
Last question. It's a two-part question. I'll give both parts at the same time. Where do you stand on Common Core, and what do you believe the role of the federal government should be in local education?
Well, I think I answered the second part of that, hopefully very forcefully, and without saying it, answered the first part too. I'm going to stand here. I feel like I'm at an AA meeting right now. I have to stand here and apologize for my behavior. I went into Washington as convicted as anybody. I wrote a book called It Takes a Family about the role of local governments in education. And I made a mistake. I followed a president who I think was well-intentioned in expanding the role of the federal government in education called No Child Left Behind. I, along with about 90% of other Republicans, went along with it. It was a mistake. I've said that publicly more than once, but I'll say it again here. But I learned from that experience. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. When I heard about Common Core, I remember someone come up to me and said, what do you think about Common Core? And they explained what it was, and I said, I'm against it. I don't know anything about it, but I'm against it. Because if it's coming from Washington, D.C., I'm against it. The last thing we need is more federal government and elites in our society telling parents that you're no longer necessary in the education of your children. I was in Dover today, and a woman walked up to me and said, how do you feel about early childhood education? I said, it's another one of these wonderful ideas put together by people who are very well-intentioned, do-gooders, who want to help, but understand that when you interject government into the family at an earlier and earlier stage, with all the good intentions of helping those children, what you do is destroy that family. The more I go around and talk at my town hall meetings about two books. One book, written that you might know, by Charles Murray, about 5 years ago, no relation to Bob, but by the name Charles Murray at the American Enterprise Institute, called Coming Apart. It was a seminal work talking about how the American family in the white community, because he only wrote it about the white community, is coming apart, and the impact that is having on our children and our ability as a society to have limited government. because Murray is a libertarian. There was a book just out 6 months ago written by a liberal Harvard sociologist by the name of Robert Putnam. Putnam, who wrote a very famous book called Bowling Alone, wrote a book called Our Kids. And what he said was the biggest problem facing America's ability to fill back in the middle of America, to have a strong middle class, as he terms it, to have the ability for people to rise, to solve the income inequality problem in America. What he said was, the biggest problem facing America is the breakdown of the American family. He goes on to say that that has the most profound effect on our schools. And he says this, if you come from a single-parent family and you're raised in a neighborhood of single-parent families, and you go to school in a single-parent family-dominated school, the chances of your child ever reaching the top 20% of income earners in America, which is about $85,000, $90,000 a year, not super wealthy, chances of that child from that situation reaching the top 20% is 3% in America. Now, I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but that's not the America I live in. The America I live in says that just because you're raised in a single family in a poor neighborhood, that your chances shouldn't be 3% to reach the American dream of economic success. And here's what he said. It didn't matter if you have that family situation. The color of your skin doesn't matter. Your ethnicity doesn't matter. It's the same for blacks, Hispanics, whites. So this idea that race is the biggest issue in America or ethnic discrimination is the issue, a liberal Harvard professor says, well, you know, that's just not true anymore. It's all about family. And if you want to improve the quality of schools in America, ask any teacher, any administrator, they'll tell you the same thing. You give me a kid who's raised in a family that values education, that child is nurtured. Putnam says, he actually uses, I don't know how he came up with the stat, but he says it, that it's more important for your child's long-term success to read to your children the first 4 years of their life than it is to pay for 4 years of college. Someone at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue has to stand up and use the bully pulpit to start fighting for the lives of poor children in America. And stop being politically correct to the point where you won't even give kids a chance in America. Ladies and gentlemen, if you know anything about my history, I am not afraid of walking on this turf. I'm not afraid of being called names for doing so. Someone has to have the courage to help save America and put these families back as a national priority, and I will do it. Thank you all very much, and God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Rick Santorum.
Nice job.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll let you go ahead. Shake hands with Senator Santorum. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take a break. We're going to reconvene at 2 o'clock and continue with our program. So we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock. Before Senator Santorum leaves, make sure you get a chance to shake his hand.
Croc TV.